Hello, I'm Pay Your Name, and today we are exploring the case The Perfect Neighbor, the Why Dairy Happened That Day. In this startling dispute slowly turned into a shocking investigation that no one expected. Everything begins quietly, not with violence, but with proximity between two homes standing side by side. Most conflicts begin with small frictions repeated over time. The neighborhood may look peaceful from a distance, but daily life slowly brings neighbors into unavoidable contact. Shared space creates tension when personalities resist each other. Conflict rarely arrives loudly at first. It grows quietly through repeated encounters and misunderstandings. Ordinary moments slowly transform into tension. Authority sometimes enters a conflict long before the final moment. Calls are made and complaints begin forming a record. The documentation quietly builds the timeline of a dispute. Each interaction leaves a trace. What seems minor on one day becomes part of a larger pattern later. Escalation forms through layers of unresolved moments. What once felt unusual begins to feel normal in everyday life. Repeated complaints can turn neighbors into opponents. Days pass, but the conflict does not disappear. Instead, it settles quietly beneath ordinary routines. Unresolved disputes gain emotional weight over time. Once tension becomes personal, every encounter feels like a challenge. Polite distance gives way to small confrontations, with words growing sharper and patience shorter. I understand your concerns. We are addressing the issue.
We need everyone to remain calm and cooperate. This will be added to
Documentation becomes the silent witness to escalating conflict. By now, the neighborhood feels different. The same streets remain, but the atmosphere has changed. Tension can transform familiar places into spaces of unease. The conflict no longer feels temporary. It has become part of daily life for both sides. When tension settles into routine, even small moments can trigger confrontation. Observation replaces trust. Each neighbor begins watching the other more carefully. Suspicion can grow even in ordinary surroundings. Unresolved disputes slowly reshape how people interpret each other's actions. What was once calm communication can strain, full of frustration. This is how relationships deteriorate over time. The space between homes begins to feel smaller than before. Distance disappears when tension rises. Proximity can intensify conflict when emotions remain unresolved. Both sides feel the weight of repeated encounters. The atmosphere has become fragile. The narrator explains that long conflicts often reach a moment where patience begins to collapse. What began as disagreement now carries emotional weight. Every new encounter feels more tense than the last. The narrator explains that long disputes often reach a stage where patience begins to erode. Teen movements around the neighborhood now feel charged with meaning. Even simple actions are interpreted carefully. When trust disappears, ordinary behavior can be seen as provocation. The conflict has become deeply personal. Both sides now carry the memory of every past encounter. The narrator explains that accumulated frustration can distort how intentions are perceived. Tension settles over the neighborhood like a quiet pressure. Nothing dramatic happens, yet the atmosphere feels different. Unresolved conflict often creates an environment where even calm moments feel uncertain. By now, the situation stands at a fragile point. The past has built a structure of mistrust that is difficult to undo. When conflicts reach this stage, a single moment can reshape everything. The next day appears ordinary, yet the tension of the past still lingers quietly between the two homes. Conflicts often continue beneath the surface long before anyone realizes how serious they have become. In part 22, small movements around the neighborhood begin to attract attention. Every action is noticed more than before. When trust disappears, awareness sharpens. People watch each other more closely. Moments that once passed quietly now carry tension. Even silence can feel uncomfortable. Long disputes reshape how ordinary situations are interpreted. By now, the environment has changed in subtle ways. The same homes remain, but the feeling between them is different. Unresolved conflicts slowly transform familiar places into spaces of caution. The situation now rests at a delicate point where tension and routine exist side by side. Nothing dramatic has happened yet. In many conflicts, the turning point arrives quietly, almost unnoticed at first. The afternoon seems ordinary, yet the quiet tension between the homes has not disappeared. Conflicts often reach a moment where routine and pressure exist at the same time. When frustration builds, ordinary noise from nearby can quickly become a source of irritation. Small sounds travel easily across the short distance between houses. Voices rise briefly, breaking the calm of the neighborhood. The long history of disagreement surfaces once more. Past arguments have often returned quickly when tension has never been resolved. The distance between both homes suddenly feels very small. In fragile conflicts, even a short exchange can change the direction of events. What challenging in tin rims than you will reach the has thing. New Kimbrian in Mullins the Sheen Peldorsfind, all we are past and tatty. In moments of crisis, the ordinary rhythm of a neighborhood stops immediately. On the right, a small visual of a quiet residential street with distant movement appears, then fades. Neighbors begin to look outside, uncertain about what they have just heard. The atmosphere becomes tense and still. The narrator explains that confusion often spreads quickly after a sudden event. Within minutes, the presence of emergency response begins to reshape the scene. Authority enters the quiet street again. The narrator explains that official response often becomes first step in understanding what has happened. The neighborhood now watches as the situation is carefully examined. Routine procedures begin unfolding. Investigations start with observation, documentation, and calm questioning. What began as a conflict between neighbors has now entered a much larger process. The story moves beyond the yard. The events become part of a formal investigation. As the night deepens, the investigation quietly expands beyond the immediate scene. More details begin to surface. Authorities carefully reconstruct events step by step to understand what truly happened. Part 37. Questions begin shaping the next stage of the process. Each account adds another piece to the timeline. Investigations depend on careful observation and recorded information. Attention now shifts from the moment itself to the history surrounding it. Earlier tensions become part of the story. Long-standing disputes often help investigators understand how events unfolded. Evidence begins forming a structured sequence of events. Each step is examined with deliberate care. Documentation allows investigators to rebuild moments that passed quickly. By now, the situation has moved far beyond a simple neighborhood disagreement. The consequences are becoming clear. Once events enter the legal process, the conflict becomes part of a much larger system. As days pass, the event begins moving through formal legal procedures. The quiet neighborhood becomes part of a wider investigation. Once authorities gather evidence, the story enters the judicial process. 2 inches to be reviewed carefully. Every detail contributes to understanding what happened. Legal systems rely on documented timelines and testimony. Outside the courtroom, the neighborhood reflects on the events that unfolded so suddenly. Familiar places now feel different. Communities often carry the emotional weight of conflicts long after they occur. The story now reaches beyond a single street. It becomes part of a larger discussion about conflict, responsibility, and consequences. Individual moments can sometimes reflect broader social questions. Time moves forward, yet the events remain deeply remembered. The neighborhood returns to routine, but the memory remains. Some moments permanently change how people understand their surroundings. In its final stages, the legal process examines the day's events in full detail. Courts interpret moments that once unfolded within seconds. Those who live nearby, the memory of the incident continues shaping how the neighborhood is seen. Places connected to conflict often carry a quiet emotional imprint. The story is part of a larger conversation about community responsibility and the fragile nature of everyday peace. A single moment can reflect tensions that were building long before anyone noticed. Time slowly moves forward, but the questions surrounding the conflict remain. Understanding what happened becomes part of the community's memory. Reflection often continues long after official proceedings have ended. The neighborhood returns to its ordinary rhythm, yet the story remains a reminder of how fragile calm can be. Unresolved tensions can exist quietly until a moment changes everything.